Welcome, and thank you for joining us on our live stream. We believe here at Active that you are worth knowing, so we created this content designed for you to explore your faith and belief wherever you're at. So welcome, and please enjoy the message.
I'm Nancy Hennings.
I'm Dave Hennings.
We've been married 47 and a half years.
We met in high school. Nancy was 15 and a half, and I was an older 16. We were just good friends through high school. After high school, we started dating, and then in 72, I proposed, and we were married.
If I had to define our relationship, I would just use the word fun, because we laugh all the time. You make a mistake, you got to go through it. When you go through life and you go through trials, if you can't find the humor in it, you're in big trouble.
I'd also say that it's critical that you have a real solid friendship with one another, because life is just too short. Life is too challenging. Sometimes it seems that the entire world is against you, but you have one another, you have friendship, and you have fun with one another. Early in our Christian walk and in our marriage, I was really questioning what was my overall point of being a Christian. What was my standing in the church? What did God have for me? I became frustrated in that, and one day something was said. I so long ago I don't even remember, but I just walked in the bedroom and I grabbed a suitcase out of the closet and I threw it on the bed. I went over to the dresser and started unpacking stuff and putting it in the suitcase. Well, I turned around and the suitcase was empty. And I looked up and noticed that Nancy was putting it away as fast as I was packing it. She says, "Listen, we are not going to quit on each other. God is not going to quit on us. So we are in it for the long haul. We're in it together." You draw from these situations in your life and to get you through the next set of trials or next set of challenges.
I can honestly look back and say that God was preparing us for some of the big, big trials that come in life. Everybody's going to go through really bad trials, but it's those big foundational steps that we took way back when we were young. But you have to have a foundation in Jesus Christ. God does not quit on you.
As you go through life, a marriage, the challenges, you have to depend on your foundation in Christ Jesus. I kind of have a visual of a teeter-totter. One person's on one side, the other person's on the other side, but in that center that keeps everything in balance is Jesus Christ. And it's through that firm foundation that we can always rely on, depend on, get answers from, and look forward to our next 50 years of marriage.
That is so good. Thank you to Dave and Nancy for sharing their story with us. They also play a really significant role here at Active. They're great activators, and during the Christmas season, they are Santa and Mrs. Claus. So we are so grateful for them. Can we give it up for them one more time? Not the real Santa, though, all right? He works one day a year, all right? But they fill in for him, so it's awesome. Hey, my name's Mike, and we're honored to have you at Active Church. We are one church in two locations, so welcome to our Yucaipa location, and welcome to those that are watching from our Redlands location. And if you are a first-time guest with us today, what a privilege it is for us to have you come and be a part of Active. There is a welcome home card in your seat back that we would invite you to fill out. And you can bring that to Guest Central at the end of our service today, or you could text welcome to the number that you see coming up on the screen. Either way, it's really important for us to not just know that you were here, but it's important for us to know your name. And if you bring that card to Guest Central, or if you bring that text to Guest Central, we are sending a care package to the Pregnancy and Family Resource Center in San Bernardino. They're doing some incredible work, and you'll get to see that care package that we're gonna send in your name. You're gonna help us provide hope in our community. And we are right now gonna be sending over 30 care packages to this organization because of the cards that have come in and the texts that have come in. So thank you so much for participating in that. We are in the midst of a series called Fight, and we're learning about one another, that we are strong. We're searching our hearts for so long, both of us knowing that love is a battlefield, right? Some of you knew immediately what song I was talking about as soon as I said the first lyric, and that great theologian Pat Benatar shares some really great truth with us. But we're learning together over the last few weeks how to fight for each other rather than fight against one another. And today we want to provide you a resource for a small cost in the lobby at both of our locations. There's a great book by Gary Chapman called The 5 Love Languages. And I want to invite you to pick that up today. It's been so helpful for my relationship with my wife, and it's been so helpful for those that we've done premarital counseling with, for those that are struggling in marriage or in relationship. It's a way to discover how someone feels love. Like, for example, my love language is physical touch. So when my wife holds my hand, it is the best day ever. I just want you to know. And my wife's love language is not physical touch. Hers is acts of service. So when I vacuumed and mopped the house yesterday, she felt love. When I helped her get that splinter out of the bottom of her foot yesterday, because that actually happened, she felt love. We all cringe, but she felt love because that's how she experiences love. And I want to invite you to pick up this book at both of our locations. It'll be so helpful for you. It's available in the lobby, and it's called The 5 Love Languages, written by a great guy named Gary Chapman. So pick that up today as a resource for you as you learn how to fight for each other. We began 3 weeks ago introducing this idea that each of us has a box. And in our box are hopes and our dreams and our desires. And they're very tangible things, like what kind of family we want, how many kids do we want, what kind of house will we live in, will we buy, will we rent, what kind of career do I want, what kind of salary do I want, vacations do we want to take, cars we want to drive. And the last couple of weeks we've been talking about these very tangible things that we can wrap our hands around. But today I want to talk about the intangible things, the things that we can only wrap our heart around. The things that are in us, the emotional things that we long for, that maybe you couldn't physically put in a box, but things that you're feeling and experiencing in your heart. Here's just a small sample size of some of the things that we long for. We all want to be respected. We all want to be admired. We all want to be trusted. We want to earn trust and know that we are full of integrity in this relationship. We all want to be prioritized and pursued and defended. And that's just a small picture of the things that you and I long for. And those things are in our box too. And we learned in week 1 that in every relationship that we jump into, whether we're dating or we're engaged or we're married or we're coupling or it's complicated or you're single and you want to mingle, you want to jump into a relationship, right? We learned that when we do that, when we jump into a relationship, we take our box of hopes and dreams and desires and we place them in the hands of the one that we love. But in their hands, it's not hopes and dreams and desires. In their hands, it feels like expectations. And expectations is the strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. It feels like they have to meet all of these hopes and dreams and desires. It feels like a heavy responsibility that they have some homework to do because they have this box and they feel like you are expecting them to fulfill what's in their box. And so in week 1, we talked about how we keep our box from becoming expectations and how we keep them as hopes and dreams and desires. And we learned in week 1 that we need to fight for gratitude. And gratitude is appreciating what you have while you have it. It's not expecting them to do the thing that they said they were going to do, but it's being grateful that they've done the thing that they said they were going to do. Gratitude sounds this way. Wow, I didn't expect that. Thank you. Even though that's the role that they said they would play. Even though they said that they would have the dinner ready, even though they said they would do the laundry, even though they said they would do the yard, even though they said they would do this thing, gratitude recognizes, and a grateful person recognizes that I am owed nothing. And so we learned that in week 1, that gratitude is the best way forward in our relationship with each other, whether we're dating or engaged, we're coupling, we're married, whatever the context of our relationship, that we would express gratitude, that we would fight for each other by fighting for gratitude. And then last week, we learned what it means to fight to be last. We discovered that not only do we believe that we are owed nothing, but we owe everything. Not only do we believe that we should be grateful, but that we want to serve. And so someone who fights to be last says, I'm here for you, and you're here for me. But it doesn't finish the thought there. They don't complete the sentence there. They understand that they're doing what they're doing because of what God has already done for them. What Jesus has modeled for us by giving of his rights, laying down his life, living a sacrificial life, loving us that way. It motivates us to treat each other that way, specifically in our romantic relationships. So if I'm here for you and you're here for me, I'm not here for you, however, because you're here for me. I'm here for you because Jesus is here for me. And what we discovered last week that we all choose when we fight to be last is we are going to prioritize your hopes and dreams and desires over mine. And so again, we learned that I'm owed nothing and I owe everything. And that's where we finished our time last week. We finished our conversation there, but I left you with a question that maybe you're thinking about at the end of our time last week, or maybe you're thinking about today. Okay, I know what I'm supposed to do to keep my box from becoming expectations, but what do I do with my box? What do we do with our box? Because these things are not bad. These things are good. These things are a reflection of the image of God in us. More specifically, it's the intangible things that are a reflection of the image of God in us. So what do we do with our box? And the reason why this is an important question is we will do one of 3 things. Based upon what we've talked about the last couple of weeks, we have this tendency to just kind of bury the things that we hold in our box and pretend that they're not there. We do one of 3 things. We ignore it, we stay busy, or we look around. We ignore what's in our box and we just say, well, I guess I'm never going to get these things fulfilled. And so I'll just pretend that they're not there. I'll just pretend that they don't matter. When in reality, that's not true. Or we stay busy. We recognize that they weren't created to fulfill what's in our box, and so therefore we'll just stay busy. We'll fill our time with other things, and we invest our time in our kids, or we invest our time in our work. And those things aren't bad things, but when we begin to prioritize those things over the one that we love, what you'll find when your kids move out is that you're no longer in love and probably no longer friends. And that's why we decide to look around. And some of you might be in that category today. You may not admit it out loud, but maybe you're thinking about what it would look like to leave this relationship and to move into another one. And you're beginning to consider, like, was Mike spying on me this week? How does he know what's into my heart and in my mind? Because this is what happens when we begin to fight against one another. We begin to look around. And we think that we're going to find somebody that we can hand our box to and maybe they can fulfill what's in our box. Can I just be honest with you? It's church. Let's just be honest in this place. If the one that you're in relationship right now wasn't created to fulfill what's in your box, neither is the one that you're looking for able to do that too. I think so often we convince ourselves that we could just find somebody to do that. And you find somebody, maybe it's just an emotional relationship, you haven't physically done anything, and you're still in this relationship, and you begin to tell yourself, well, maybe they can fulfill what's in my box. They're so nice, and they're so kind, and they're so good. Listen, we all know this. This is what we tell our kids. The beginning of a relationship, everybody's on their best behavior. That was a very uncomfortable laugh in the room, wasn't it? But everybody's on their best behavior. But what you'll discover, if you decide to look around and eventually end this relationship to move to a new one, you'll discover that you've only changed the face, but you haven't changed anything else. Because the one you're in relationship with wasn't created to carry around and meet all of your needs in your box. And neither will the new person. This is why I encourage people who have gone through divorce to stay single for at least 2 years. And you might say, well, why 2 years, Mike? Because I don't think I can convince him to stay single for 5. Time is your friend. And part of the reason why we find ourselves failing in second relationships and in second marriages is because we haven't faced the reality of what was broken in our first relationship. And far too often we're giving our box to somebody and we're thinking, hey, they could fulfill these things. And God goes, they weren't created to do that at all. So what do we do with our box? What do we do with this box of hopes and dreams and desires, tangible and intangible things? This is why I love the scriptures, because they're written by men and women like you and me. They know about life. They've experienced life. They've experienced love. They've experienced relationship. They're not unfamiliar with it at all. I think sometimes when we read the scriptures, whether we're new to this or we've been doing this for a long time, we have this assumption that these writers are so holy and so good and so perfect, and all they care about is just this religious thing that they're doing. But in reality, they're real people who had their life changed by a real Jesus. And what's so beautiful about what they write is they apply it to all aspects of life. One of those writers was Peter, and he wasn't so holy. Peter was one that had a bit of an attitude. He had a bit of an anger issue. Peter denied Christ 3 times on the night that Jesus needed him the most. And Jesus restored him. Jesus brought him back close after the resurrection. It was Peter that gave the first message of the church. And 3,000 people came to know Christ that day. It was Peter that Jesus said to, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. Peter had good days and bad days. Some theologians believe that Peter was married because there are some conversations that he has with Jesus that insinuate that he's married, because only married men would have to do some of the things that Jesus is asking Peter to do. And so Peter understands relationships. He understands the tension. He understands what it looks like when we fight against each other, and he understands what it looks like when we fight for each other. And it's in his letter that he answers the question, what do we do with our box? And I want you to see it. I want you to read it and experience it, because what he has to say is powerful, and quite honestly, it's remarkable. And so if you brought a Bible with you this morning, or if you have the Bible app on your phone, we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 5, and we're going to start in verse 5. 1 Peter chapter 5, and we're going to start in verse 5. If you don't have a Bible with you or have the app on your phone, that's okay. We'll have the verses on the screen for you at both locations, along with some notes to help you understand what we're talking about. And feel free to write it down, take photos if you need to, whatever is helpful for you to track with me, whatever is helpful for you to remember what we've talked about and to apply, feel free to do that this morning. Peter opens up this letter by talking about how God has rescued him through Jesus and the resurrection. And it's in chapter 5 that he begins to lay down some really great words about relationships. And he makes a point that we've already talked about the last few weeks, but he makes this point to bring out another point, which is, what do we do with our box? And so I want to start with his first point that leads to the next. And he says this in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5. He says, all of you, every single one of you, clothe yourself with humility toward one another. This is what we talked about in week 1, and it's what we discussed in action in week 2. That I'm owed nothing, and I owe everything. So clothe yourself in humility. Not humiliation. There is a great difference between the two. Humiliation is about shame. It's about embarrassment. But humility is choosing to go small. We've all been around big personalities, haven't we? Maybe you're a big personality. And big personalities are not the problem. They're not trouble. It's what we do with our personality in moments when we're around people. We can be in a room with someone that has a big personality, but when they choose to go small, they develop and encourage and inspire the people that are around them. But many of us have probably been in a room with someone who has a big personality that sucks the room dry. They're relationship vampires, right? And they just draw from you. And you don't want to be around them for a long time. You only can take them in just a couple of bites. And then you have to leave their presence. What Peter is inviting us to consider is that we would choose in our relationships with each other, but specifically in our relationship with the one that we love, that we would choose to go small. That in every point of tension that we have in those relationships, that we would ask this question: what would a humble person do? Even though I'm mad, even though I'm frustrated, even though I'm angry with you, what would a humble person do? Because I could be big and I could be loud. I've done it in my relationship. I'm good at yelling. I don't know about you. I'm good at getting mad. I don't know about you. But in those moments of tension, we would ask the question, what would a humble person do? We're clothing ourselves in humility. And here's why. Peter writes, because God opposes the proud. If you would like to be on the opposing team of God, Peter says, then choose to be arrogant. If you want to play a game against God, then choose to be proud. Now, don't mistake this for God not loving those people or loving you in those moments where you're proud or where you're arrogant. Don't mistake this for God not choosing to show grace and compassion. This is just God saying, I'm going to take a step back, because if you think you know the best way, I am not going to force myself upon you, because God is a gentleman. And he does not demand that you follow him and demand that you serve him. He commands it. And the difference between a demand and a command is that you get to choose what you're going to do. The command says this is the best way forward. A demand says you don't have a choice. And God is a God who gives commandments, who says, follow me, who says, do life with me. And if you don't want that, then just know that God opposes the proud. He leans back, just like you do with proud people in your life. You lean back and say, go for it, man. You do whatever you want if you want to make this decision. If you have teenagers at home, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You wonder how you made it as far as you've made it in life without them, because they have all of the knowledge, don't they? And so did we when we were teenagers. And so will our grandkids and great-grandkids. They'll have all of the knowledge, and you'll just smile, and you'll choose to go small, won't you, right? You'll just, what would a humble person do, right? Or at least we're going to think about that. It may not come out that way. Peter's invitation is, go small, because God opposes the proud. And then I love this verse, but he gives grace to the humble. He gives the humble a free gift to be in his presence, to experience his love, and to choose to tell a better story. Humility is an invitation to God. Perhaps God has not moved in your life because you have chosen to live a life of arrogance and pride. Humility is an invitation for God to move. There are a lot of things that you can do. There are a lot of things that you can control. It's in those moments where things are out of control that we turn to God. And this invitation from Peter is in those moments where you think you have control, those are moments where you should go small as well. Because God, in his way, is the best way. That's why we believe that everybody, when they connect their story to the story of God through Jesus Christ, can tell a better story. In case you missed it, Peter then re-emphasizes what he said in a different way. He says, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand. The writers of the scriptures talk about God's right hand as being his power hand, because the image that they're thinking about is that a king during their time would have a right-hand man that would accomplish everything for them, would help that story of the king to get out into the kingdom, the commands of the king to get out into the kingdom. And the writers of the Psalms specifically say that Jesus sits at the right hand of God. And so this image that Peter is giving us is that God is watching over you. God is protecting you under the powerful right hand. That God's power is for you and not against you. That you would humble yourself under his mighty hand so that he may lift you up in due time. One version says, lift you up at the proper time. When you're ready to go, God's ready to go. Because God is a gentleman. God does not force his way upon you. Humility begins with God. That's where we learn humility from. We talk about how God is love through Jesus Christ often, but what we miss is that love gets expressed in a lot of different ways, and humility is one of the greatest expressions of love because it chooses to go small, and Jesus, being God in the flesh, went small for you and for me. Which brings us to our question. Okay, so what does this mean for my box? Because we've talked about these things the last 2 weeks. So Peter, what does this mean for my box? And Peter says, I'm glad you asked. Let me give you some clarity as to what you do with this. He says in verse 7, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Some of you have heard this before. Some of you understand this but have never read this before. The him in this sentence is God. And what Peter is inviting you and I to do with our box in our romantic relationships is to not give it to the person that cannot fulfill it, but to give it to the person, the one God who can meet every single need, because he is a God who knows you best. Why? Because he created you. One writer says that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. It's irrelevant if you feel that way or not, because God said it. And how God said it was with confidence, because God created you. He made you with those beautiful pointy ears. He made you with that gorgeous bald head. He gave you those great looking green eyes. He gave you that body that you have, right? You are fearfully and wonderfully made. The writer of the Psalm says, I know that full well. I love what else the psalmist says. The psalmist says this, that God knows you before you were even being formed in your mama's womb. That you were God's idea. He said he needed one of you. And so he decided to create one of you. And the reason why Peter says that you got to take your box to him is because he knows you best. And he can meet all of your needs. In other words, before you take it to them, take it to him. Because it's when you take your box to him that you discover that God is a God who shapes and forms your identity. We live in a world where we struggle with who we are. We live in a world where we're not sure how to define ourselves. And I want you to know that the best way that you can define yourself is by calling yourself a child of the Most High God. There is no greater way to define yourself. There is no greater identity. There is no greater way forward. There is no greater name for you than a child of the Most High God. And when you give your life to Jesus, you discover the heart of God, because you've given your heart to God. And not only does he give you a great name, but he calls you to a great purpose. This is why it would be terrible to try to give this to my wife, because she doesn't know me best, even though she knows me most. It would be terrible to give this to the one that you love, because they don't have the capability to fulfill these things. Only God can do this. And maybe the question you have is, okay, so how do I hand this to God? And you hand this to God by simply participating in the art of prayer. Prayer has this weird connotation in our culture today. Prayer is used in situations where there are wounds and brokenness and tragedies. It's used by people who are aware of prayer to try to help solve the problem without solving the problem. Often what can happen is that this tragedy takes place and we send thoughts and prayers. For some people, we do that because we don't know what to do. For other people, we do that because we want it to make it look like we're doing something, when in reality, we're doing nothing. And both are missing what prayer is really all about. Prayer is remarkable because prayer gives you access to God. It gives you full access to God. You ever been around a celebrity? Have you ever seen maybe your favorite celebrity or favorite sports player or favorite athlete or favorite someone? Maybe you passed them as you were walking on the street or you were in a mall and your heart kind of skips a beat a little bit. You kind of like maybe dance a little bit, like you can't talk to them, you're a little bit nervous because it's somebody that you saw on TV, it's somebody that you saw in a movie. My brother, John, works in Hollywood. He works for the Ellen Show in the Ellen Digital department. And that little booger sees all sorts of famous people every single week. And the two people that I'm incredibly jealous of that he has met is, and don't judge me, is Jerry Seinfeld and John Cena. He's seen both of them. And he sent me a text right afterwards and he said, I just shook the hand of Jerry Seinfeld. So the next time I saw him, I said, first I sent a text back and I said, don't wash your hand. Because the next time he came and saw me, I'm like, I want to shake the hand that shook the hand. And then he said he fist pumped John Cena and he almost got swallowed in that guy's fist. My heart skipped a beat and I was jealous. John has access to these incredible people. Prayer gives you access to God. And you don't have to do a thing to earn that access. God has done everything to grant you access. Prayer is remarkable because you are leaning into the heart of God. And I'm not talking about your formal prayers, although that is a form of prayer. I'm not talking about the prayers where you would say, Dear Heavenly Father, and you would end it with, in Jesus' name, amen. And you would repeat prayers and talk prayers. Those things maybe you were taught, and I'm not bashing those things. I think that those are good things. But this is an invitation to stop praying polite prayers and start praying honest prayers. You ever prayed honest prayers? I love that Peter actually says, cast all of your anxiety. Because when these things are not being fulfilled, you know what it causes? Anxiety. It causes you to have this sense of, I don't know what to do. That's why we try to ignore it, but it doesn't last long. That's why we try to stay away from it, but we can't stay busy that long. And then we begin to look around because we need the anxiety to be lessened. We need someone to solve it. Peter says, they can't, but he can. When you take your box and you place it before God, you're opening up your heart and you're saying, God, here's what's going on. You ever been around someone who's anxious? Maybe it was your child. Maybe they hurt themselves or they were wounded. What do? They come at you with their hands open. And Peter says, perhaps that's the posture you should take. You ever been around somebody that is just begging and pleading for help? Maybe they're down on their knees. Peter says, perhaps that's the posture you should take. Bob Goff is one of my favorite authors, favorite speakers. He was a lawyer before he was an author and a speaker. And he says all the time that our posture is important. Our posture is important. And he talks about a case where he had a young man who he believed was innocent, and the young man claimed his innocence. And he was going to defend him, and he was going to put him on the stand, and he was going to be cross-examined. And they worked through what he was going to say, but Bob talks about how they worked through how he was going to sit. And he told this young man that when he sits in the witness chair, that he needed to just place his hands open, palms up, on his knees. Underneath the desk, nobody had to see it, but just open, palms up on his knees. Because he said, son, It's impossible for you to get defensive with your hands open. You're innocent. Let's show them that you're innocent. And you be honest and answer every question. Your posture and my posture is important. And Peter would know this because Peter learned how to pray from Jesus. God himself taught him how to pray. And when Jesus taught the disciples how to pray, the first followers of Jesus how to pray, he began the prayer this way, with the name that we can use when we talk to God when we're in a relationship with Jesus Christ. The name he uses is Father. Now, Father might have a bad reputation in your story because you don't know your dad, or your dad wasn't there, he wasn't present, he wasn't good. What God is doing here is just changing the narrative of what it means to be a dad. A good dad gives good gifts and meets every need. Every need, not every greed. Some of the things that you think you need fulfilled in this thing, God will go, I got something better. I got something different. Peter learned this, and he wants you to know this. He watched it happen. He read about it from one of the most famous kings in King David. In fact, the phrase, cast all your anxiety on him, was something that he ripped from the pages of the scriptures that David wrote. David writes this incredible prayer in the Psalms. It's a poem crying out to God. I want you to hear the words of David as he talks with God, and then I want to ask you a question. Psalms 55, verse 11, David writes this: destructive forces are at work in the city, and threats and lies never leave its streets. David says, I can't believe this is happening. God, I need you to do something. And then David just opens up his heart. He's raw, he's real, he's not polite, he's not respectful. Listen to what he says to God about those that are coming against him. He says, let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the grave, for evil finds lodging among them. You know what this can be translated as in our culture today? To hell with them. David told God that. And God didn't go, David, language, right? He didn't say that to him. And then he says this, but I call to God. The Lord saves me. Evening and morning and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. My conversation with God doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. It's constant. I don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time in a certain posture. I can be driving, I could be walking, I could be working. My conversation with God is like a relationship with others. I can constantly pick up the conversation. Don't you have a friend, or have you ever had a friend where you don't speak to maybe weeks or months at a time, and you send a text and it was just like you talked yesterday? You pick up the phone and it was just like you had a conversation yesterday. My friend Neil is that. He lives in Oregon. We didn't talk for 6 months, and I sent him a text the other day, and it was like we just picked up like we were in high school. This is God, and this is what prayer does. It's a constant communication with him. And then David says, God ransoms me unharmed from the battle waged against me. My companion attacks, and here's where he talks about relationships, very intimate relationships. My companion attacks, maybe you feel that way too, violates their covenant. It feels like they're not doing what they promised to do. Their speech is smooth as butter. When we get into an argument, I always lose because they're really good at this. And yet war is in their heart. It just feels like we're not connecting. It feels like we're fighting against each other and not for each other. What do I do? Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. This is the phrase that Peter takes and shares with you and shares with me. So I have a question. Have you ever prayed like that? Have you ever just tore open your heart and said, God, I have this box, and I'm not sure what to do with it. I keep trying to have somebody fulfill it, and I'm failing every single time because they weren't created to fulfill what's in this box. If you've never been that honest with God, then you've never opened your heart to God. God is not offended by what you're thinking and what you're feeling. In fact, that's what every father longs for. It's what every mother wants from their kids. And there may be moments where your child, like mine, will come to you and they're sharing their heart, and it might come violent, it might come angry, and if you're like me, you pause them and you go, hi, don't speak to me that way. But God doesn't interrupt you, because what he longs from you is that you and I would approach him and say, God, I need you. God, I need you, because I got a box full of things that I believe that you've given me. And I don't know what to do with them. That's why Peter said, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. If it matters to you, it matters to God, because you matter to God. If it matters to you, it matters to God, because you matter to God. And he's not going to be upset or angry. He invites you. You have full access. Listen, you're going to unload somewhere, so start with God, because he's the one that can meet every need in this box. He's the one that shapes who you are and what you do. That, my friends, is remarkable. Prayer is remarkable. And what you'll discover when you take your box to God is that the first remarkable thing God will do will be in you. Because you'll take your box and you'll say, God, here it is. Here's my box. And God, would you teach them how to fulfill this? And would you teach them how to make this happen? And would you teach them to be a better husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend? Would you teach them, God, work in them, God, work in them, God, work in them? And God will go, yeah, I'll get to it, but let me start with you. Because that's the remarkable thing that God does, is that he cares for you. And when you give your heart to God in a relationship with Jesus Christ, God treats that as the greatest thing that he can do. So, I have homework for you. It's simple, but difficult. This week, take your box to God. Let me pray for you. God, we treat prayer as one of many things that we have the privilege of doing. But I'm hoping that today, God, we would move prayer to the top of our list and treat it as the remarkable thing that you've gifted us with. That we would recognize that we have full access to you. And that you listen and that you hear and that you do respond at the proper time when we're ready. And so I pray for those that have been trying to give their box to all sorts of people that were not created to fulfill what's in their box. And I pray, God, that we would begin to give our box to you. That we would begin to open our hearts and our hands to you. That we would take steps and participate in the homework of taking our box to you. God, I know that doesn't solve everything initially. I know it doesn't fix everything right away. But God, what it does is it focuses us on a better story and a better way. Your way. So help us to see ourselves as you see us. Help us to see our spouse, our significant other, as you see them. And may we not forget that we can cast everything upon you because of Jesus. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen and amen and amen.
Thank you again for joining us for this week's message. We believe your generosity is changing the world. If you'd like to partner with us, click the link in the description below. And we'll see you again next week.